I want to speak for a moment about discouragement and the call of God. And I want to do so from the story of David. If you want to pull it up, David, go to 1 Samuel chapter 17. And here's your disclaimer. I'll be honest with you, I was struggling this morning. I kind of had some interesting dreams, about some things and stuff, but I'll give you what I got. So, guys, this is for you all, you guys, and all of us as the Lord permits this morning. If you don't know much about David's life, I want to point out some interesting things. David becomes anointed by God, by the seer, the prophet Samuel, to do great things. And then he goes back to the flock. And then he gets called up, starting in chapter 16. He gets called up into the palace to serve the king. He serves Saul. He plays music for him. He gets called into the courts of the king. And then what happens? That period of time happens and he goes back to his father's fields. How do you think he was feeling about that at the moment? Anybody ever had a letdown about stuff that they thought was supposed to be and didn't actually pan out, or wondering what in the world you're supposed to be doing? And God, I went and did all this stuff, and now what I'm supposed to be doing? And so I find it interesting as we enter the story about, it's the one that we all know, but it's David versus Goliath. I'm just going to read it. And may the Lord speak to us as he kind of has given me an idea this morning. The Philistines gathered their forces for war at Soka in Judah and camped between Soka and Azekah and Ephes Damim. Saul and the men of Israel gathered and camped in the valley of Elah, and they lined up in battle formation to face the Philistines. You all know this story. For 40 days... This is interesting. When David shows up, David's given some stuff by his father to take food and everything to his brothers who are fighting there. But when he shows up, they're marching out. They're marching out and they're singing their battle cries. They march out. Can you imagine how discouraging that would get after 40 days? If you're the company commander of this army and you're like, all right, guys, all right, let's sing like we're going to whip them today. And then you don't fight. And then you come back out and you say, all right, the next day, let me hear your battle cry. And then you don't fight. And then for 40 days, it's a real thing to feel discouraged. It's a real thing to be walking through life and to go through stuff and to, feel like you're not moving or getting anywhere. And it says in verse 15, but David kept going back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock in Bethlehem. Every morning and evening, verse 16, for 40 days the Philistines came forward and took his stand. The Philistine. On one day, Jesse had told his son David, take this half bushel of roasted grain along with these 10 loaves for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Also take these 10 portions of cheese to the field commander. Check on their well-being of your brothers and bring a confirmation for them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. Verse 20, here we go. So David got up early in the morning. It's not easy. I talked with Jack about that this morning. So David got up early in the morning, left the flock with someone to keep it. Shows kind of level of maturity and responsibility. He didn't just go and abandon whatever else he was supposed to be doing. He was growing as a young man. He found somebody to take care of the sheep while he was gone, and then he took off. He arrived at the perimeter of the camp as the army was marching out to its battle formation, shouting their battle cry for the 40th time. Israel and the Philistines lined up in battle formation facing each other. David left his supplies in the care of the quartermaster and ran to the battle line. When he arrived, suddenly the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, came forward from the Philistine battle line and shouted his usual words, which David heard. Anybody feel like you're just being confronted on a usual basis with threats and challenges and discouragements? His usual words. When all the Israelite men saw Goliath, they retreated from him terrified. Previously, an Israelite man had declared, "Do you see this man who keeps coming out? He comes to defy Israel. The king will make the man who kills him very rich and give him his daughter. The king will also make the family of that man's father exempt from paying taxes in Israel." Wow. David spoke to the men who were standing with him. "What will be done for the man who kills that Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Just who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The troops told him about the offer, concluding, "That is what will be done for the man who kills him." Verse 28. David's oldest brother, Eliab, listened as he spoke to the men, and he became angry with him, saying, "Why did you come down here?" he asked. Who did you leave those few sheep with the wilderness? I know your arrogance and your evil heart. You came down to see the battle." And, it's interesting. The first or second discouragement that comes to David really comes from within his own family. You don't think that'll happen, sheesh, And I just want to say that. I want to say there's some things, we're still going down the discouraging path here for a moment, but, he's been overlong in seeing this great glorious plan that God had take place. He's been watching sheep in the middle of nowhere. He's been, the whole nation's discouraged. And then now his own family comes out against him and says, You're just here for the show. You have nothing, and if you really look into that statement, what he's saying to him is that you have nothing good in you. You have nothing good in you. You have nothing to offer, is what that's saying. You have nothing good. You're just here, and there's a lot of that packed into it. There's a lot of place. I think people from this generation, our generation, every generation are fighting to know what their place is. And so the older brother looks down and says, "You have no place here. This is, we're here doing this. You have no place." And God help us when we do that our own selves to others, and we want to rely on pride or experience, or we want to rely on some stupid construct of man instead of listening to God, instead of being humble, instead of recognizing when God moves and when He speaks, instead of having courage. And so, verse 29, I've heard the translation I love the most is he says, "What have I done now?" protested David. Or in other words, who knows it? Is there not a cause? That's what he says. Is there not a cause? It was just a question. Then he turned from those beside him to others in front of him. He moved on, in other words, and asked about the offer. The people gave him the same answer as before. So you all know the next part of the story. He goes, people talk it up. He goes before the king. The king gives him his armor. It doesn't fit. The whole teaching about wineskins is very true and stuff. And not that you can't do the same things that have done before, but you have authority given to each one of us in our own generation to do the new thing that God is speaking and doing here on this earth. I have to believe this about God, that He's not a God that just keeps looking backwards, but He's a God that is so sufficient and so full of what we need. I want to trust in this, that He is birthing the new thing for us, and He's always going to have the new thing. He's always going to have the good thing that we're moving forward to. And we need to trust, and I need to trust in that hope. So it doesn't use the armor. We all know about that. And then, let's go down to verse 41. So they get out on the battlefield. Here's the other thing about the life that we live. At some point or another, you're going to have to be willing to step out on a battlefield. You're going to have to be willing to be the one that bears the burden. You're going to have to be willing to be the one that gets put on the spot. You're going to have to be willing to be the one that steps forward and raises his hand. Props to you this morning, my friend. And if you're not, you're like the rest of the freaking army that cowers in fear and is a coward. I believe God had a special thing that He was doing through David, but we believe through Christ we are all priests and kings. We're all given high calling and high purpose. You have to be willing to put it to it. The Philistine came closer and closer to David with the shield bearer in front of him. He had protection. David had nothing. Do you think David cared? David wasn't a victim, praise God. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he despised him because he was just a youth, healthy and handsome, like Silas. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks? Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks? Sit down, you little child. You don't deserve to be here." We all love that moment in movies. But are we willing to trust that God has that or even greater set aside for us in our life, even when we're sitting out in the middle of shepherd fields, or we've been to the court and we've been back and we don't know where we're going or where this is going to go? Then he cursed David by his gods. "Come here," the Philistine called to David, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts." I don't think necessarily, we rarely face the threat of death these days unless you're in police or, or military or different things like that. But I think very much so, a sneakier thing possibly is that we face the death of our spirit and we face the death of our soul as we grow up and as we mature and as we live. And I think our enemy wants nothing else for us, to say, to hell with it. And to not walk in what God has birthed in us and to give up and to say, well, we all face the death of our soul, the death of our spirit. We all get things plugged up in the space, and instead of being able for God to move through us at one point or another. And then everybody knows what happens next. David says, "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of armies." And I say it like that because, oh to God that we could stand up like he did in front of our enemies, or just in our day-to-day life and say, "You come up against me with sword and spear. I come up against you in the name of the living God." Get out of my way. And so what I find instead, if we go to Psalm 1, David knew very well the reality of what it was like to live like us and to be us. And if I say that David knew what it was like for us to live, I'm going to say that how much more does our Father know your heart, every single one of our hearts, and He knows what we face and the discouragements that's come again and again. One of the things that brought me to tears a couple years ago was Jessica provided for me to go to the Emmaus Walk when I was in transition period in my life. I was leaving the job I'd been at for 8 years and moving on to who knows what. And, as part of that process, whoever sponsors you, collects prayers and words of encouragement from people that you're presented with at some point. And I remember a friend of ours had written, and he asked God in the Spirit what he wanted to say to me. And he said, I know that there have been many that have come against you with words, but take heart. And I want to say this to each one of us that are in this room. There are many that have come against each one of us with words, with curses, that would seek to tell us that we don't have a place, we don't have a purpose, and we don't have anything worth fighting for. Not doing it right. Anything else like that. I want to say that happens to us. But we have to take heart, and we have to take encouragement to know, and we have to take encouragement and give encouragement to each other, to stir up each other to say, yes, there is a fight, there is a purpose, there is a call on your life. There is a call on your life. Don't worry about not living up to it, but do something. And that's words to myself this morning as well. Any one of us. Don't lose heart. And you think about here in Psalm 1, how happy is the man who does not walk in the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway of sinners, or sit in the company of mockers. Instead, his delight is in the Lord's instruction, and he meditates on it day and night. He is like a tree planted beside flowing streams that bears its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. And so the thing that I know, having grown up and lived a little bit, is that there's plenty. The thing I despise, if I were the Lord speaking, and sometimes there's those scriptures that says 6 things the Lord hates, even 7 he despises. What I would say is that in this day and time, there is so much discouragement, and there is so much stuff that's just heaped on in layers that makes doing anything seem not worth it, or a futile use of our life. And it's what it is. It's just the enemy stands before you and scoffs, and it's a scoffing spirit. It's a mocking spirit. It's like, do you come against me with sticks? What are you doing here? Don't you know I'm in the place to do this and you're not? Don't you know that you don't have any purpose here? Don't you know what you thought about this morning? Don't you know what I've seen you do? That condemnation and that spirit is always against us. And I just want to say this morning to turn our hearts to God. It's one thing I love about you, Silas, is that I see in you, it's a rare thing when you're sitting at your house and you're worshiping the Lord in genuineness of heart and of spirit. Fight to protect that. Don't fight to do something great and glorious for Him. Fight to protect that and see what He'll do with it.